Hey guys, Willie Mayette from JAZZEDGE, and I want to welcome you to the next lesson for Jazz Piano Daily. And this is Abby right here. You want to say hi, Abby? Hello. All right, time to go rest. All right, so Jazz Piano Daily, daily jazz piano lessons. We also cover other styles as well. Today's lesson is going to be my go-to dominant seventh chord voicing. Super important lesson. You're not going to want to miss it. Let's get into it right now. All right, so our typical our typical dominant seventh chord voicing is this. There's a G7 chord. It's what we would call a block chord or a seventh chord. We talked about those block chord seventh chords earlier. So there's my G7 chord. To create a jazz sounding dominant seventh chord voicing, I'm going to move it so it sounds like this. So I check out. So listen, there's my G7. There's my jazz G7, right? So regular G7, jazz G7. All right, so let's talk about how I created that jazz G7 chord. A couple of different ways of approaching it, so I'm going to go through each of them with you. The first way is go down to the seventh, which is F, create a major seventh chord, and then flat that fifth of that chord, okay? Gives you those notes, F, A, B, and E. Right, which you will notice here is your, you see it written right down here, that's flat 7, 9, 3, and 13, okay? So that's one way you can do it. So again, go down to the 7th, make a major 7th chord, and then flat the 5th. And I'm saying flat the 5th of the major 7th chord that you just made, not the 5th of G, because obviously this would be 11 on G or 4 on G, all right? So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to think about your guide tones. So what I like to do is start with the guide tones first. So I have my 7th and my 3rd. Those are my guide tones. 3 and 7, 7 and 3, those are the guide tones. And then I'm going to play it with the left hand, and then I'm going to play it with my second finger and my pinky. So pinky, second finger. And then I'm going to have one note that goes in between, right? So one note that happens in between and one note that happens somewhere above. Now, obviously, the note that happens above can't be too high up because I need to be able to reach it, right? So let's start with the note that goes above. The note that goes above, I'm going to get my 13. The note that goes in the middle in here is going to be my 9th. So this G7 chord is my guide tones along with my 9th and my 13th. Now, of course, this is not the only inversion of it, right? We can also do this form as well. So I think of that as my A form, my B form. But for right now, all you got to really focus on is just get down this one right here. If you could learn how to form that dominant seventh chord voicing, boy, your jazz piano playing is going to sound great, all right? All right, so now let's go through and we're going to learn all 12 of these, all right? Again, like I said in the minor chords, I'm going to play the root in the left hand, but as I will show you in a second, you're going to also do them in your left hand too. So you'll have to forgive me, there may be an enharmonic misspelling somewhere in here. Well, yeah, see, even on these F sharps, I wouldn't do normally flats, but they put it as flats. So don't worry so much about that. I'm just going to show you all of the notes anyway. So there's C7. There's F7. There's B flat 7. There's E flat 7. There's A flat 7. D flat 7, F sharp 7, B7, E7, A7, D7, G7. So you really just want to go through and practice those. And like I said, you want to also do them in the left hand as well. C7, F7, B flat 7, E flat, A flat, D flat, F sharp, B, E, A, D, G. Now, you can also move into these other inversions, right, which makes it a little bit easier to be able to move back and forth between these different chords, right? But we're not going to do those different inversions right now. We will do something like that a little bit later. Right, but you can see how by utilizing the inversions, it makes it a little bit easier for you to be able to move around to those different chords, okay? You got plenty though right here to practice. Just try going through those different dominant 7th chords, and like I said, make sure that you're understanding the way that they're formed. Now, going back to my example here of utilizing, Autumn Leaves, listen to what happens now with the first 2 chords, right? So the first chord was C minor 7. In yesterday's Jazz Piano Daily lesson, we talked about the rootless C minor 7 chord. Now the second chord in is F dominant 7th, right? We're doing Autumn Leaves in the key of G minor versus E minor. So listen to what this sounds like. Right, so you can hear immediately those first 2 chords, the C minor 7 to the F7, sounds gorgeous. Especially when you have the bass, going on down below there, right? It really sounds nice along with the roots. Now, the reason that we use these rootless chord voicings, I really didn't explain that yesterday, so I'm going to explain it to you now. We use these rootless chord voicings in jazz because the bass player is taking care of the root of the chords, right? We don't use rootless chord voicings like this necessarily in other styles of music. It's mostly in jazz. Is that to say that you can't use this in funk or R&B or rock or whatever? No, but you're going to have to just kind of use your ears because, playing something like that might be a little too much tension. Right? So you might find that that's a little too much tension. But you can do things like there, you see what I'm doing is I'm playing a little grace note. We're going to talk about grace notes in just a few days. But you can see I can throw that grace note in it, and then all I'm doing is I'm taking out the 9th there. When I go to the F7, right, normally the 3rd, the 7th, the 9th, and the 13th, I'm just taking out the 13th. So we're trying to make this simple here, right, and keep it simple. So the main thing that you need to understand is that these rootless chord voicings that you see right here, right, so all of this is mostly for jazz. And if we want to use them for other styles, we're probably going to start to take out some notes in these chords and really probably just do a 3-note chord instead, right, versus a 4-note chord. Because these obviously have quite a bit of tension with the 9 and the 13 in there. We use those rootless chord voices because the bass player is going to be playing the roots. We also use the rootless chord voicings versus those block chords because, again, why play the root in a block chord when we have the bass player playing it? Also, why play the 5th in that chord when the 5th really doesn't add much to our chord sound? If I take a look at C major 7, C minor 7, and C dominant 7th, pay attention to this note and this note in each. So C major, C minor, C dominant. Notice how the root and the 5th are the same for all 3 of those types of chords. So why play the 5th in there? It doesn't add anything to the chord. So as jazz players, we replace that 5th with the 13th, right? The 5th to the 13th. Again, this gets confusing. Students are like, well, wait a second. Why is this considered 9 and 13 versus 2 and 6? Okay? The reason is because these are chord tensions. They are not chord tones. We are not using these as chord tones. We are adding them in addition to our chord tones, right? Because if we were to think of this as 6, then this would really be replacing the 7th there, and we wouldn't have 7 and 6 together. Just like kind of like when we have a C minor versus a C minor 6, right? We don't play the 6th and the 7th at the same time, right? It conflicts. So same thing on this dominant 7th chord. We don't play the 6 and 7 at the same time if we were thinking of it as 6. Instead, we think of it as 13. It's a tension, meaning that we want the tension, we're adding that tension in, right? So a simple way of thinking about it is when you think 9, 11, 13, those chord tensions that you hear about, those are notes that are being added in addition to the chord tones. Now, with that said, it might be a little bit confusing because I remember when I used to play C7, I used to play it like that. And then they said, oh, add the 9. I'm like, oh, okay, I do that with my pinky, and then they're like, add the 11. I'm like, I don't have enough fingers. How am I going to do that? Then I thought, oh, maybe I do that, and I like stretch it in the 13th. How am I going to get up to that 13th? I can't do it. Yeah, so what happens again, the way we made these voicings, just use the 3rd and the 7th of the chord, right? It's all you need is the 3rd and the 7th of the chord. Those are your guide tones. Then add in your 9, add in your 13 for your dominant chord. So 7th and 3rd, add in your 9, add in your 13. And the other thing to remember, you have your guide tones, one note goes between them, one note goes above. Guide tones, one note between, one note above. Both of those are C7. Right? So go through and practice these different chords. If you want all of this sheet music, just go ahead back to jazzpianodaily.com, enter in your name and email address there, and I'll create a free account for you. There is no cost for these lessons at this point. I don't know if that's going to change, so be sure to get in now while it is still free. Please subscribe to the channel if you like what it is that I'm doing. Subscribe, like the video, turn on notifications, leave a comment down below, and if you have any questions or you have a lesson that you'd like to see me cover, go ahead and leave it in the comments below. And again, thank you guys very much for joining me today on Jazz Piano Daily. I'll see you tomorrow.